Hello everybody, hope everybody's having a great day today. Welcome to Dev Actualized. Today we are just going to be going through an example of a common concept in web development and in development in general called Throttle, and we're going to talk about what it is, why it's important, and what cases in the real world it solves. So essentially Throttle is a way in which we limit the rate at which events trigger functions that call APIs or servers. So it's like a rate limiting function. So for example, if I resize this window, this resizing of this window doesn't call just once, it calls maybe hundreds of times for each increment that this window is resized, right? And I might want to do some heavy calculations when a window is resized. Another example might be mouse movements. So around a screen, somebody might track mouse movements, and I'll actually show you how that works in this video here. And why that's useful is sometimes you want to be able to see a call, or like see what your users are doing or where they're on your page. Some people might implement something like that. And another example is just like a scroll function to load more pace, say on a social media platform or something like that. So that's what Throttle is and what it's used for. I just have a simple project here with a index HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So what I'll show you is, as you can see, as I type, all of the characters down here appear immediately, and we have roughly 20 API calls, which is, or theoretically API calls. This is just obviously incrementing something, but that's not exactly ideal. So I can show you an example, or I can show you how you might fix this. So again, we've just got our input, which triggers a function, change text, which changes the text and increments the counter for the theoretical API calls. So I'll show you how to implement how Throttle works. So Throttle takes in a function and it takes in a delay, which we can just set to default 1000. And the first thing that it does is it returns a function, and that function takes in args, which are just the arguments that would be passed to whatever function you pass in. So for the mouse example, that could be like the x and y coordinates, or the text example could be the text. So the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to call a function, which is the one we passed in again. And then we have to think about, because this is a function that limits the rate at which it's fired, so obviously we must be dealing with time. So we can do a set timeout here, which will only run after delay. And what is the purpose of this set timeout? Well, we want to be able to guard or prevent this from being fired. So how can we do that? Well, one way is with a variable, and we can just call it waiting period, which will be true when we're supposed to be waiting and false when we can fire again. So what I want to do is, if we're in the waiting period, which for the first call we will not be, so the first letter we will not be, we can return. And then in that first call, we can run our function. So say I type h, it comes up here, we've ran our function. But we want to limit the rate. So we want to turn waiting period on, right? We want to set it to true. And then in the set timeout, we can do, after a second has passed, after 1000 milliseconds has passed, we can set this back to false. And then the next thing we have to do is just create the throttled version of the change text function. So that's going to look like this. So that's our func func there, and we pass in our milliseconds. Now that can be 1000, that can be 500, whatever you want. But we'll pass in 1000, and then rather than running change text, we will run throttled change text, which is here, and really is just this, right? So that's what we're running every single time an input event happens. But we still have access to this because it's a closure. So let's just refresh this and see if we get a performance difference. So as you can see, so if I hold down a letter, you see how this is happening once every second? So that's limiting the rate at which it's firing. But if you notice, we have a bit of a problem. So basically, what's going on here is that I'm typing these characters, it's limiting it to 1 call per second. But if let's say, the completion part of the text, so this is HO, this part, let's say this part is called before the delay has occurred, right? If that is called before the delay has occurred, well, waiting period hasn't been set back to false yet, so we can't get here, right? Because we've returned. So we have to be able to have a way to sort of complete what we need to do to run that last time. And how we can do that is with another variable, and it can be used sort of as a switch for how our logic will work. We'll call it saved args, because if you think about it, if we're going to run it one more time, then we need to ensure that we have the arguments that were passed in. So in this case, we would have to have w space aru, or are, right? So we have to have saved args. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that we capture those saved args. So we're still going to return here so that we don't proceed, but I'm also going to set saved args to args. So that's how we do that there. And then the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create that complete function that I was talking to you about. And just like this here. And so that's where our functionality is going to be. And this is going to be sort of what we use to determine what we do in here. So rather than running this little callback here, what we can do is we can run complete function. And what did we do before is we just set waiting period to false. So we can do that again. So, sorry, I think I used the wrong braces here. Waiting period, at some point within this function, it will become false again. So we can turn it off, because we have to turn the waiting period off. Otherwise, we'll never have it run again. But how do we, what are we going to do? Like, how do we trigger this, right? So let's just close that. So basically, we've captured the arguments. So if I run the first time, if I run it the first time and it's h, that's at, let's say, 0 milliseconds. If I run ELLO at 500 milliseconds, well, delay hasn't occurred yet. It hasn't finished yet, right? So we're going to save args. We're going to create set saved args to args, which is great. And saved args is only ever going to be truthy when we, say, for example, have ran again at 500 milliseconds or 499 milliseconds or whatever it might be before 1,000. So if saved args is true, that means we got here, we returned, and we didn't run. So we can just do this here. So these are two little scenarios. Like if saved args is null, we're going to do something. And if it's not null, we're going to do something else. So if it is null, we'll do exactly what we did down here, is we will reset waiting period so it's not true anymore, and so that we don't wait anymore. And then what we will do is we will run that function to complete it, right? So we'll run it again with saved args, and that will ensure that this cutoff doesn't happen anymore. So that's great. Then we have to set saved args to null, because we have to, reset it. And the last thing that we have to do is we have to do another set timeout and run it after delay. And the reason why we do this, I'll show you in a second. But let's just check if this is doing what it's supposed to be doing and seeing if it's functioning properly. So it's still running every second, but it is completing, right? It's finishing. It's doing that. It's completing what it needs to do. And what's the reason why we run this extra set timeout function? Like, it's a little confusing, right? So the reason we do is because, let's say, for example, again, with that 0 milliseconds rule, 0 milliseconds we fire H, and then 500 milliseconds we fire hello. So this, when we fire this, it's not actually getting called until at 1000 milliseconds, right? And this is being called 0 milliseconds. So why we do this is because we have to, first off, we have to set this back to false. We've just ran the function again, and we know we're supposed to only run the function every 1 second. So we ran it here from 0 to 1,000. We ran it here from 1,000 to 2,000. So we need to, once it's past like 1,000, like once it's at like 1,001, we can set this, or once it's at 2,001, sorry, we can set this back to false, right? So that's what it's doing, is it's keeping the initial functionality, which is resetting the waiting period, but it's only doing it because it just ran again. It ran here, after a second, and then it's got to wait another second before it can run again. So that's why we do another set timeout function there. And yeah, so I mean, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much how it works. And I'll just show you one quick other example if you want to stick around, with mouse movements. So I've got a little thing here, and I will just comment this out. And so if I can refresh this, so this is just a record coordinates function, which is going to update. You'll see. So as you can see, I move my mouse around. This gets incremented quite high, and here's all my capture, right? All my capture data. Obviously, that expands really quickly. Like you can see, we're at 150, right? So if we create a throttled version, record coordinates, and rather than running record coordinates, we can run this here. As you can see, it grows really quickly. Like we're at 194, 95. So every single time you move, it creates a lot of different API calls. So, you know, I just realized coordinates had been misspelled. So instead of doing that, we can throttle it, and now you can see that it's every 1 second, right? And you can make it more realistic, do it 250 milliseconds, and there you go. So this has been Throttle, and yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Hope you learned something, and have a great day.